Good morning, everyone. We are back this morning talking about MMA fighting and boxing here in Georgia. Here with us this morning, two local pro fighters. I got Tyra Parker, a pro MMA fighter, 22 years old, and a veteran on the fight cards out there, pro MMA fighter Steven Upchurch, who, might I say, congratulations to you, Steven. Big weekend. Let's just list off some of the awards you got. All right, we're going to brag here for a second. Trainer of the Year, Fight of the Year, and Knockout of the Year. Good morning to the both of you. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, Brent.
We were talking about the Georgia Athletic Commission. We had Dave Oblish here and the fight promoters. Talking about safety is what it all kind of barrels down to at the end of the day here. Making sure that someone in charge is looking out for fighter safety. You're a 22-year-old fighter. How important is it, safety in the ring?
It's very important. It's I don't want to make the sport seem violent or anything, but it's the kind of sport that you need to have safety in. Just like, I mean, America's sport is football, but you don't want to put a Pee-wee football team up against a NFL league team. It's just something that somebody knowledgeable needs to have the position there, so they know not to put someone that's not as experienced against someone that is experienced, and putting them together could hurt.
In that kind of fight card. And Steven, I'll ask you the same thing. You're a pro fighter. You've been around for a long time. The importance of having somebody making sure that the matchups are good, because we all know that there could be a fight promoter out there who could say, boy, this could be a good beatdown for the crowd. I'm going to take somebody who I know is going to kick the living crap out of another guy for the sake of the crowd. How important is it to have somebody that's safety-minded?
I mean, fighter safety is paramount to the sport because, I mean, worst case scenario, you know, MMA is still a really, really young sport, and if there isn't someone, you know, watching the matchups and making sure they are safe for the fighters, you end up with someone seriously injured. You know, it's a dangerous sport, and just like any other sport, we have injuries and bumps and bruises, but a serious injury or, God forbid, a death or something like that in the sport would just set us back too far.
I mean, we have video of you guys out there fighting. I mean, you guys are both MMA fighters. It is a dangerous sport. It is a risky sport of you guys going out there into the ring and fighting. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt maybe the person that you were trying to be matched up with in a fight may have been too good for you, even in your amateur career going up to being a pro?
As far as in this state, or?
Yeah, just in general, when you started to fight, maybe a new fighter isn't as aware of how good another fighter is.
Oh no, definitely not. And especially the fighter's spirit that you have to get into the sport anyway. You're fearless.
Right.
You know, they'll ask you to fight whoever. It's like, oh, fight John Jones tomorrow, okay. You know, like, yeah, and I actually had a couple of fights of those of mine, and my first two fights I had actually was, I really had no experience at all, no amateur record, and as others have said earlier, it's the sport has really progressed in the past, really, like 3 or 4 years, so much. But 3 or 4 years ago when I started, I was able to fight, you know, on some bigger promotions, and I really had no experience at all.
And we're talking about pushing the state of boxing here, Steven, in Georgia, and getting a lot of the fighters here recognition. And when you hear things like the UFC, right, which is the holy land for pro MMA fighters, right? When you hear things like the UFC is thinking about not ever coming back here to Georgia until these guys can get their act together, meaning the Georgia Athletic Commission, and they can get their secretary and all that stuff worked out, that they may not come back here. As a pro MMA fighter here in Georgia, how do you take that?
Oh man, that's a terrible proposition for local fighters. One of the avenues that we have to get to the big shows like your UFC and Bellator is when they come to town and we get to fight on that undercard and we do well on that undercard, and then we start getting into their, you know, their main promotions, the one that are, you know, pay-per-view televised and are nationally recognized. And that's really how we can go from being a local fighter that's trying to etch out a living to really making a career and a living out of this sport.
Yeah, and as of a month ago, right, there was this threat that all the fights here in Georgia were going to be put on hold until they could figure it out, and it appears they have figured out a way around it to still bring the fights here. It's important on a lot of levels. I know a lot of people who go to watch these fights, they are usually involved in the sport themselves. So it brings in, I'm assuming, some money as a way of living to kind of grow this sport and excitement for the sport, right?
Oh, absolutely. Locally, it's not only the fighters that are making money. You have sponsors who are getting business out of the exposure that they get from the sport. The promoters, the vendors, the local clothing companies. It's definitely a statewide endeavor. It's not just
and definitely a trickle-down effect. And Tyra, let me ask you, this sport, you're relatively young. You're 22 years young. Yeah. You know, this sport has taken off really in the last 5 years. What is it like to you to be a pro MMA fighter on the women's circuit?
It's amazing. You know, I've been an athlete my whole life, and just kind of always had that in my head that I was going to do some sort of sport forever. And when I got into this 4 years ago, my senior year actually, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I can never, despite the amount of ADD, I can never get distracted or tired of the sport.
The thought that crossed your mind when you had heard that fights for 2013 here in Georgia would have been canceled.
Oh, I was devastated, definitely devastated. Especially when, as a fighter, you have to build your record somewhere. You have to start somewhere. If there's no way to fight in Georgia, then that means that another promoter from a different state is going to have to pay to fly you out. And if you have no record to begin with,
nobody's going to fly you out.
Yeah, nobody's going to want to. You know,
take that risk on bringing somebody that doesn't have a history of it, right?
Exactly.
Stephen, I know what you would want to do. You'd want to take a few of these guys from the Georgia Athletic Commission, the Secretary and Secretary of State, bring them down to your gym, knock them around a little while, knock some sense into them.
Maybe.
How do you make sense of all this stuff?
I mean, I've actually been to quite a few of the commission meetings. I have a fair grasp of how everything works, I think, and the commission is fighting for our safety. And, you know, I appreciate that they're doing that. As a fighter, Tyra mentioned it earlier, we can be kind of hard-headed. We don't always know what's best for us. Guys they won't throw in the towel when they should. They'll take matchups they certainly shouldn't.
Right.
And that's what those officials are there for. They're trying to do that job the best they can. And as long as they find a way for us to continue fighting, I know they've brought in an outside source to help us match some of the fights and stuff. That's what's important to me as a fighter.
Yeah, well said, because you and I both know, you ask a couple of those guys on the MMA circuit, man, they will say yes to anybody, anytime. Yeah, and what I just tell our viewers that you get into the ring, he is a scary man watching you even spar inside of the ring. I have seen it and witnessed it firsthand. All right, Tyra Parker, Stephen Upchurch, good to have you here this morning. Good luck to you guys in your 2013 fights. Coming up next, stay with us. We'll wrap up the entire show.